All right, it is such a pleasure to be here this morning, speaking with you. Um, this is my title, Church Evolution, and we don't even need this up here. It's just gonna get in the way. All right, so this is not going to be your typical sermon. I'm not your typical Adventist or person in general, so don't expect, a lot of what you may be used to in terms of sermons. But this is important to me, this message. Actually came a long time ago from some thoughts that I've ran over in my brain for about 20 years now, since I had a professor that introduced me to some of these ideas at university. And I've... Oh. Oh, man, that's creepy to hear myself. Anyways, this concept has continued to resonate through me and through the way that I approach the Bible and life since I first encountered it, and I wanted to share it all with you. But next. So if you think about typical sermons, right, if you wanted to graph them, you could say, well, some sermons are really emotional, like Veronica's. And some are more like, thinking-based. And then some are more heavily on the experience side, like for those of you that remember Ron, there's a lot of this region going on. And then suddenly, we switch over to here. And so, some are more based on your personal experience, which is totally valid. Some are more based on solely on the Bible, which is also totally valid. Next slide. Sergio's sermons tend to kind of hover in this region here. And Hans is a little bit more Bible-y, a little bit less on the emotional, more thinky. And then here's this one. So total thinking, total experience. It does have some Bible content, let's say, in there. But it's not going to be focused on any particular verse. It's going to be more about how I approach the Bible and how kind of, no spoilers. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to show you 5 slides, and you're going to tell me what you think they have in common, okay? Next slide. And just keep going slowly until we get to the one that has all 5 on it. I know it's tricky. All right, so what do these slides have in common? Any guesses? Crustaceans? Yep. Do you think that it would be fair to say that these are all crabs? One's a spider. Well, actually, arthropods. Well, we won't get into that. But, so let's go to the next slide. Those actually aren't all crabs. Go back 1 slide. Does anyone want to guess which one of the 5 actually is a crab? Only one of them is a crab. Top left, that one? Okay, anyone else? The red one? Yeah. Bottom right, this one? Well, Lauren wins the prize. She probably cheated somehow, although she is incredibly intelligent, so. Aww. So yeah, that's the only one that's actually a crab. None of the rest of these are crabs. So go ahead. This is due to something that in evolution they call Carcinisation. And I'm not here to debate about evolution with you. I'm just telling you what they think and why they think it. Essentially, I'll read this little statement here first. This guy back in 1916 started noticing that a lot of things look like crabs that actually weren't crabs. And they called it carcinization. It consists essentially in a reduction of the abdomen, the center, of a macrocrustacean, together with a depression and broadening of its cephalothorax, so that the animal assumes the general habit of a body of a crab. So essentially all it's saying is various creatures just keep evolving into crab-like forms, even if they originally didn't look like that. Next slide. So here's kind of like the family tree of life of crabs, except for only one of these is actually a crab, and I can't even remember where the actual true crab evolutionary tree is. It's one of these branches. I think it might be this one. But all of these have a common ancestor that wasn't a crab. And then they evolved to be more crab-like over time, which is pretty weird. But to make it a little bit more clear, if you go to the next one, basically what we're saying is that these two here, you see how different they look? They are more related to each other than these two, even though these two, to me, look a lot more similar. But actually, those other two are the ones that are more closely related. So that's kind of weird, and why is that happening? Why do things keep turning into crabs? Well, I don't know, and I'm not here to answer that question. Apparently, it's probably there's something in their environment where they live that is beneficial for them. At least this is the theory of evolution, that when they're more crab-like, they're able to reproduce more successfully and have more babies that are also more crab-like, et cetera, millions of years, and now they're all crabs. All right, next. This is an example of what scientists call convergent evolution. And this is a broader topic that happens a lot in the animal kingdom, where things that have similar niches in their in their environment, they find food the same way or the same types of food, they have the same environmental pressures on them, they evolve into similar forms. So fishes, they evolved into sharks, or convergently evolved into this form. Ichthyosaurs, which were actually reptiles, looked like that, the ichthyosaur. Mammals evolved into dolphins. Scientists think that the original cephalopods that are like dolphins and whales, they actually had fur, they lived on the ground, they look like dogs. Penguins, as we know, most birds fly, and the penguin decided, no, I don't need to do that. But why did they decide that? Well, scientists think, it's because they found this evolutionary niche where they're able to be in the water and hunt fish, and over time they became more streamlined like the rest of these. So if that continues, maybe eventually you won't be able to tell the difference between a penguin and a shark, which would be terrifying. All right, so convergent evolution. Any questions on what that kind of means? Yeah. I mean, we reproduce, so our kid is more like the two of us. All right, next slide. And now for something completely different. But don't forget about the crabs. Next slide. So, theology, over time, has tended to not converge. In fact, it's gone in a totally different direction. It's become divergent. Next slide. So the first major difference that I could come across in theology, besides between like God and Satan, which obviously Satan was definitely wrong, there was the difference in opinion, we can call it, between Cain and Abel. Cain thought, I'll just give God some wheat when he asked for a lamb as a sacrifice, and Abel said, no, I'm going to obey what God asked for and give a lamb, and that will be my sacrifice. And God did not accept Cain's sacrifice, and he got super mad and killed Abel. Fortunately, there was still Seth later to continue on in God's path, but they had a difference in theology, essentially, and that split the view of like half the population at the time. So there's been other kind of divergences as we go through history. The next one is Noah had a difference of opinion from the rest of society, right? They did not believe him when he said there was a flood coming, and they were wrong. And so everyone is descended from Noah's descendants because they all died. Next. There's been a lot of other divisions. I'll go through them quickly. The Tower of Babel, there's a lot of divisions there. Different people had different ideas, different languages. So the people that remained in Ur that didn't go with Abram got a special message from God and later became Abraham. He received a special message and a theology that made him different than those around him and went to the Promised Land. Later, skipping way forward, Jesus had a difference in theology from the Jews, where he believed that he was the Son of God and was here to save the world, and that so that was a big difference. Later, that movement became Christianity, and it split between the Orthodox and the Catholics when they couldn't decide who should ultimately be in control. This was called the Great Schism, and there was the Eastern people that were in Byzantium and the Roman Catholics, and they had a power struggle and also theological differences, and they split. And that's why we have Orthodox Christians today and the rest of us. And then later, the Catholics had a pretty big division. Martin Luther kicked off the Great Reformation, and by nailing his 95 Theses up and said, what the Catholics are doing in all these ways is we do not agree with it, and we are going to protest against what the Catholics have been doing. And so that started the protesters, or the Protestants, and fortunately, there haven't been any other divisions since then, right? Well, actually, there has been a lot that brought us to this location here at 24/7 today. The Protestants split into Anglicans and other Protestants. Then they divided into Baptists and Anglicans. I'm not going to go into all the theological differences here because there's a lot, and also they're minor. The Baptists split into the Millerites. You probably heard about the Great Awakening, and I think actually that was the Second Great Awakening, if I remember correctly. But the Millerites had a special message about the Bible and the end times and health message, and they ended up also splitting, and there are Millerites still that aren't Seventh-day Adventists. There are non-Seventh-day Adventists. And even within Seventh-day Adventists, there have been divisions. We don't talk about them a lot because, I guess it's kind of embarrassing or something. I don't know. We don't want to call out the fact that there's been divisions, even since our church formed in the 1850s. So, all of those divisions, and then in your mind, imagine all of those divisions as they divided, they also divided. So it's not just like this one line necessarily, but it's division after division after division after division. And that doesn't even go into the fact that there's other religions and other cultures in the world that maybe don't even know about Jesus. So there's been a lot of divergence of theology. Let's go to the next slide. So, but the way that we as Adventists typically view this is that this is a good thing because God is bringing us, at each step, he's bringing us closer to the truth. He's separating the wheat from the chaff. He's saying, this is my new message for my special people, and those of you that accept it, then you become this new branch that's closer to me and closer to the truth than before. Right? Let's go to the next slide. So, I love graphs. I'm an engineer. And so, as you could tell by even just the start of the sermon, I already had a graph. So let's have more graphs, because you can never have too many graphs. So let's kind of like plot that then. As I just described, general knowledge of God and and obedience to his will by any group of people versus time. Okay? And this is not to scale. Next slide. So, originally, of course, Adam and Eve had a very good knowledge of God, right? They knew him directly. They spoke to him face to face. And then there was the fall where there was sin in the world, and things went downhill literally very, very quickly. Um, well, maybe like 900 years here because they lived a long time. But by the time we got to the flood, there was clearly very much of a loss of knowledge of God in the world. And I personally believe, and you can disagree, but that's why God kind of hit the reset button and was like, we cannot continue this trajectory. If we do, very soon there will be no one who knows anything about me. And God loves us so much, he's not willing to let that happen. And so that was kind of a low point there with the flood. And, if you read the story of Noah, you can see he was definitely not a perfect person. And there was a lot of things that he picked up from that society that then translated over to, subsequently, the rest of the repopulation of the world. So things were at a low point, and now if we go to the next slide. This is kind of now where we're entering that range where I was talking about God bringing his light back into the world. Saying, okay, I'm going to send someone here with a new message to bring the world back slightly closer to where we should have been all along. Next. So this is kind of a broad overview, but I think, when Abraham went and left Ur and went to the Promised Land, then there was now people who were called Jews, and they had more knowledge of God than their neighbor because of the messages that God sent to Abram and his descendants. And specifically Moses led them out of Egypt, and then Jesus led them to knowledge of his kingdom and of his sacrifice. Constantine, I didn't put him as like one of the little peaks or valleys because really what he did was make it so that the Roman Empire adopted Christianity. So he didn't bring any new light, but he did make it so that a lot more people knew about Christianity and were forced to take it on. And then they mixed it with their own beliefs, which then you can see there was quickly sort of a peak here and then a falling off. So that may or may not have been a good thing depending on how you look at it. Martin Luther came and like I said earlier, he said, we're going to protest, this is not cool. The way that Christianity is behaving, specifically the Catholics. And then there's probably a lot of other ups and downs in here that I'm not covering. But Ellen White, I think, has a lot of truth that she gave to the world. So next slide. I just listed here really quick what I think the messages of various reformers are. Adam and Eve, sin is harmful. Cain and Abel, sin must be cleansed through sacrifice and obedience to God. God chooses people was the message that I got from Abraham's story. Moses brought a lot of knowledge about God's laws and that they are important for society and for the individual and that they're beneficial. Jesus, God is love and he forgives sin even though we can't obey the law perfectly. Martin Luther I think his message was that we're all the church and not just the priests or the church. And Ellen White brought us a lot of truth about the end times and health message. Next. But there's other ones that I haven't covered here. And these are somewhat of my bias here. But I think there's definitely places in the Bible where it shows that God was reaching out with a message and trying to push society in a certain direction. So go ahead. So the way I see it is that God is continually trying to move people and societies closer to his ideal, trying to bring more knowledge and light into the world step by step. And he meets the societies where they are. I think that's a critical point. If God were to give a message that was so completely truthful that the society that he gave it to couldn't handle it, then nobody would accept it. So he has to make it in terms of what they currently believe and try to push them in the right direction instead of saying, no, this is exactly how it is and there's no way to communicate that to you because you've fallen so far. But he often communicates new truths to specific people, and we have a name for them, prophet or reformer. The Adventist Church has like a test that we think is valid when you want to find out if there's actually a prophet amongst us. And those reformers or prophets, they try to go and convince others, but many don't accept, and that leads to this split between people who have this new truth and people who don't. Go ahead. Of course, it's not guaranteed. Satan will oppose God at every step and will continually try to push us the opposite way. And if he can't completely stop God's message, which he can't because God is all-powerful, then he'll try to make it so that as few people as possible accept that new light. And also humans have free will. Let's be honest. We don't need Satan necessarily all the time to mess up. We are more than capable of sinning on our own. And we end up with these splits in theology or in the knowledge of God's will. Next. So this brings me to the core of what I wanted to talk about, which is something that Adventists believe in called present truth. And it's really important to me personally. Essentially what it means, or I'll read you this passage that it's based off of in 2 Peter 1:12. For this reason, I will not be negligent to remind you always of these things, though you know and are established in the present truth. So the founders of the Seventh Adventist Church had a dynamic concept of what they called present truth. This was an openness to change, and they had a openness to the new theological understandings that built upon the landmark doctrines or pillars of Adventism that had made them a people. So essentially what they believed is that there's these pillars of truth, these important core beliefs. Now we have 28 of them that the Adventist Church has defined. And then present truth builds upon them and brings us into new light as we go forward in history. Go ahead. James White was one of the founders of Adventism, and he said that the church has ever had a present truth. The present truth now is that which shows present duty and the right position for us. Present truth is present truth and not future truth. And the word as a lamp shines brightly where we stand, and not so plainly on the path in the distance. Ellen White pointed out that present truth, which is a test to the people of this generation, was not a test to the people of generations far back. I think it's pretty clear what they mean, but to summarize, God is shining a path on us right in front of us to let us know where we need to go next. And he's continually revealing new things that we need to accept and follow if they're correct. And maybe we can't see that far out in front of us. And maybe people behind us didn't have all the right ideas. A lot of their ideas were good, but maybe we have new light that we need to consider. Next. So let's go back to those crabs. I told you not to forget about them, so there was a reason that they were there. Next slide. So do you guys know in like TV shows where they're like zoom in, enhance, and then all of a sudden you can read the license plate that was all pixelated and blurry? So let's do that same thing with our graph that we had earlier. Let's zoom in and enhance a little bit. And next slide. So we started out with the reformer, right? We hit a low point here, sort of, and then the reformer came in and gave us new light, or those that accept it. So, next slide. Those that accept it, their knowledge of God went up. They now know more about God than they used to. But what is going on up here? What is this? What is this? Like, why doesn't it just continue going up and up and up forever? Why don't we just continually know more and more about God? Why are there ups and downs? And I believe that that is due to a thing that I will now call Carcinisation. Essentially, organizations start becoming more and more crabby. We get the light from God. There's a split. It's painful. Some people go one way, some people go the other way. But those that follow God's will eventually start to falter. They start to say, I need more structure. I need to not think about theology so much. I can't be like this involved with the church. It's just too much. Can somebody just tell me what we believe? And let's just do that, and I don't need to think about it. So then you reach peak crabbiness, and you start on the downhill slope, and people are actually losing knowledge about God at this point, which is terrible, but it's happened over and over through history. And then another reformer comes, at least hopefully. So next. So I touched on it a little bit, but why does this organizational carcinization happen? I think it's because humans, we want power. We want to be able to tell other people, no, you're doing it wrong. I'm doing it right. Please stop. And if you don't, you're out of here. We want structure, like kind of like a shell, you could think, like a structure. We want to be able to feel comfortable and unchallenged in our beliefs. We want the safety of not having to kind of confront each other or debate things. We want to fit in with each other. We want to take the path of least resistance, essentially. And we also dislike change. And so those things combined tend to promote leaders within who are now saying, because I want power and other people just want structure and safety, I'm going to give them that power. I'm going to give them the structure and safety that they want. And in exchange, I get what I want, which is power. And then maybe later they're like, well, now I have all this power, so now I'm going to do things that aren't that great, like don't even follow God's will. Yeah. Or it becomes a crab. So, but also, we just want to feel self-righteous. I think Adventists, we're very good at this, actually. We're very good at saying, no, we're right, and you're wrong, and it's okay. We still love you. But in our hearts, we're saying, it's so great to be right. Maybe you don't, but I definitely have. All right, let's not say that it's entirely humans, like maybe Satan has some role in this, but I think it's mostly us. All right, next. But the antidote to carcinization is present truth. And it breaks the crab shell. It comes in, it smashes up our understanding of God, but it causes conflict. It's painful to have these types of debates. It's painful to confront things that we didn't want to confront. We didn't want to think about them. In Matthew 10:34, Jesus himself says, whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. And that was true. People became enemies of their own family because they accepted Jesus. And that's happened many times since then. Next. So what is our responsibility? Listen to God's voice. Read the Bible, but also understand the context. Know what culture you're in, and know what culture those people were in at the time. So think about who it was written for, and at what time, and why God would have been saying those things to those people. Look for those essential truths and common themes that are throughout the entire Bible. And I think that not to be self-righteous here, but I think the 28 fundamental beliefs do a great job of summarizing those essential truths. But we could debate that. That's the whole point of my sermon, right? So I think it's important to see, that God is love, and that he's trying to bring more knowledge of that love and that salvation and forgiveness to all of us and everyone as a member of society. So one of the key things, though, and Sergio actually has touched on this before in some of his sermons, is that you got to look for the direction that God was pushing that society in. If he said, maybe women should not speak up in church. Well, you might read that and be like, okay, well, that sounds horrible. Like, why would God say that? But then maybe you find out, well, actually, women weren't even allowed in church before. So now God is saying, okay, they can be in church, but please keep them quiet, So that the direction is that women are more equal and that God wanted women to be equal. Next. Don't hold too tightly to the concept of being right and engage with new ideas. Healthy debates can be good. Next. Of course, healthy. That means acknowledging where someone could be right and you could be wrong, acknowledging that maybe both of you could be wrong, and you now have a common understanding together of what you think. Or going to the source, going to the Bible, saying, this is why I believe what I believe. It's more engaging than just being like, no. However, keep in mind that not all ideas are good. David Koresh, which was the leader of people in Adventism, led them to a horrible situation in Waco, and there was a massacre. He had ideas that were clearly not right from my perspective, and he was an Adventist. So just because an idea is new does not make it correct. Next. So my call to all of you today is to fight the Carcinization within our church in particular, but also Christianity as a whole. It is worth the struggle. I think there's a lot of really great things about Adventism, and there is actually a lot of variation of belief within our church, even just within this room. There's people who believe vastly different things than each other, and that's an opportunity for discussion. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Next. So that is my message for today. Break the crab shell, and thank you so much for your time. I'm going to end with prayer. So if you bow your heads with me. Dear Lord, thank you so much for the opportunity to present this message today and the opportunity to just shine your love and the way that I believe you want to continually reach out and bring us closer to you and to the knowledge of your heart and of your truth. We love you so much, and thank you for everything that you've done for us. In your name, amen.